The fog rolled across Fort Bragg's sprawling gates, curling like restless spirits around the barbed wire and guard towers. The early morning chill seeped through the asphalt, and the dull hum of engines and chatter of soldiers created a low, tense rhythm that marked the start of another day on the base. A dusty gray SUV approached, its headlights cutting weak lines through the mist. Inside sat a woman whose calm composure contrasted sharply with the uncertainty swirling in the air around her. Her name, to those who would recognize it, was Major Evelyn Carter. She wore a simple jacket, no insignia on the sleeves, no medals, no bold display of rank. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that drew attention even when she made no effort to demand it. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, unshaking. Her eyes scanned the checkpoint ahead, taking in every detail, the positions of the guards, their body language, the rhythm of their communication over the radios. Nothing escaped her notice. She had survived worse than young soldiers questioning her presence. The guard at the first gate, a fresh-faced private who had only recently completed basic training, stepped forward and raised a hand. "Ma'am," he said, trying to sound firm despite the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "You're not authorized to enter." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. Polite yet edged with an authority the private could not measure. "I'm Major Carter," she said calmly, producing her ID from the glove compartment. The guard squinted at the name, his brow furrowing. "Your records?" It says he hesitated, uncertain. "Restricted clearance." Evelyn nodded, her voice steady as she interrupted. "Call your commanding officer. They'll confirm my orders." There was no impatience, no agitation, only the kind of quiet confidence that made hesitation feel almost embarrassing. Around them, the base stirred. Engines rumbled in the distance. A helicopter thumped rhythmically as it rose into the fog, and the radio crackled with chatter from soldiers preparing for drills. Yet at that checkpoint, time seemed to pause, centered on the woman in the SUV and the young soldier tasked with stopping her. Sergeant Lewis, the officer overseeing the checkpoint, approached after hearing the commotion over the radio. His face was lined with years of military protocol, and his eyes narrowed as he looked at Evelyn. "Major Carter?" he asked, disbelief heavy in his tone. "You're alive?" Evelyn gave a faint nod, the kind that spoke volumes without words. 3 years ago, she had been part of a convoy that disappeared in Kandahar. Every official report had listed her as lost in action. Her name, in many circles, had been etched into the memorial logs of soldiers gone but not forgotten. Yet here she was, very much alive, seated in a plain SUV, appearing to most like any other soldier reporting for duty. The private swallowed hard, unsure if he should salute, stand aside, or continue following protocol. He fumbled with his radio, trying to relay the situation to his sergeant and the higher-ups. Evelyn remained patient, observing quietly. She didn't need to assert power. It radiated from her presence. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the base layout as if mentally planning her next steps. She noted every patrol route, every blind spot, every security measure, all out of habit, instinct honed from years in covert operations. Finally, the colonel assigned to oversee the checkpoint arrived. His jeep skidded onto the asphalt, tires crunching over gravel, and he jumped out, eyes widening when he recognized her. "Major Carter? You're supposed to be." His voice faltered, disbelief cutting through the crisp morning air. Evelyn's gaze met his, calm, unyielding. "I'm supposed to be here," she said simply, cutting off the unfinished sentence. "Now, let's proceed." The tension at the checkpoint melted into cautious acknowledgement. Radios buzzed, reports were confirmed, and Evelyn's SUV was waved through. As she drove past the guards, whispers followed in her wake. "That's Major Carter," one soldier muttered. "The one from Afghanistan?" Another shook his head in disbelief. The aura surrounding her wasn't something that could be faked. It demanded recognition, even if grudgingly. Inside the base, Evelyn took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. She had survived the impossible, navigated a world that had written her off, and returned without fanfare. Yet she knew the real challenge was only beginning. The 117th Infantry Regiment awaited her, a battalion riddled with low morale, fractured leadership, and soldiers skeptical of any authority figure, let alone a woman who had vanished from their records. Her mind flicked to Captain Reed, her soon-to-be second-in-command. He would be loyal, competent, but skeptical, trained to question every decision, every order. She would need his support, but more importantly, she would need to earn the respect of every soldier she commanded. They did not yet understand that leadership was not granted by rank, medals, or reputation. It was earned every day through presence, decisiveness, and courage. As Evelyn's SUV rolled deeper into the base, the fog began to lift. The morning light touched the parade grounds, glinting off the metal of rifles lined in formation. She observed the soldiers milling about, the drills in motion, and the casual chatter that betrayed underlying tension. She noted the gaps in organization, the unevenness of marching formations, the subtle signs of discontent. Every detail mattered. Every weakness was an opportunity to strengthen. At the operations office, she finally stepped out of the vehicle. The chill of the morning air bit at her face, but she welcomed it. It sharpened her senses, reminded her of the clarity required to command effectively. Around her, junior officers and enlisted personnel paused in their tasks, stealing glances. Whispers grew as realization dawned. The ghost of Kandahar had returned, not as a relic of memory, but as a living, commanding force ready to take control. "Major Carter," Colonel Braddock finally said, attempting composure, "your orders." He trailed off, realizing no words could fully convey the surprise, respect, and caution that now defined the room. Evelyn nodded, acknowledging him, her presence demanding that the unspoken rules of hierarchy and discipline be respected. She was back, and the base would not forget it. Her first day had not yet begun, but she had already made an impression. The guards who had doubted her at the gate now understood a simple truth. Underestimating Evelyn Carter was a mistake no one would make twice. As she strode toward the main building, she allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. The fog of the morning had lifted, revealing not just a base preparing for the day, but the beginning of a story that would test loyalty, courage, and the essence of leadership itself. The operations office was unusually quiet, considering it was the heart of Fort Bragg's daily military rhythm. Desks were neatly aligned, radios hummed intermittently, and the muted clatter of keyboards formed a low undertone. Yet in the midst of this routine, an extraordinary presence had entered Major Evelyn Carter. Every eye in the room flicked toward her, some in disbelief, some in curiosity, and a few in silent admiration. She moved with effortless authority, her steps deliberate and unhurried, her gaze scanning officers' faces as if reading the hidden truths behind their measured expressions. Sergeant Lewis, still recovering from the shock of her arrival at the gate, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, Colonel Braddock," he stammered. "Her records?" "They say she's," he faltered. The words "deceased" hovered unspoken, yet their weight filled the room. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Yes," she said softly, voice calm but carrying unmistakable strength. "The reports were premature. 3 years ago, a convoy in Kandahar had been ambushed in the dead of night. Every soldier assigned to that mission was accounted for, most tragically, in lists of the fallen. Evelyn Carter had been listed among them. Soldiers and officers alike had grieved her loss in silence, some attending ceremonies in her honor, others placing photos on their walls. Yet she had survived, navigating enemy territory with a handful of soldiers, relying on her wits, resilience, and unshakable resolve. Now she stood alive, every bit the figure who had been written out of existence. Colonel Braddock adjusted his posture, trying to mask his shock with formality. "Major Carter," he said, voice betraying a flicker of disbelief. "Your orders?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She let the tension settle around them, a quiet storm waiting to erupt. "I've been reassigned," she said finally, sliding a folder across the desk toward him. The folder contained sealed orders, signed by the highest authorities. The 117th Infantry Regiment. Command effective immediately. A murmur swept through the room. Officers exchanged glances, some incredulous, some hesitant, and others quietly impressed. To most, Evelyn Carter was a legend whispered about in hushed tones, an operative who had defied death, led missions that no one else could, and returned with a calm certainty that inspired both awe and fear. Few had ever worked directly under her, and fewer still could claim to have understood the depth of her capabilities. Captain Tyler Reed, Evelyn's soon-to-be second-in-command, leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. He had heard of her exploits, yes, but seeing her in person was different. There was no flashiness, no dramatics, no exaggerated bravado. She exuded confidence without demanding it, authority without arrogance. Reed realized that commanding respect would not be about rank or medals, it would be about earning it, and Evelyn Carter had already done that with a single presence. As the day progressed, Evelyn began reviewing personnel files and operational reports. She noticed discrepancies immediately. Drill schedules were inconsistent, training logs incomplete, and equipment inventories did not match the actual supplies. A seasoned officer noticed her keen observation and whispered to a colleague, "She's already seen what most of us missed in weeks." Evelyn didn't glance up. She was focused, her mind racing with strategies to bring cohesion to a regiment that desperately needed it. Her eyes lingered on one file, a roster of soldiers marked with notes on performance and conduct. Some names were familiar from her prior deployments. Others were newcomers, raw and untested. She highlighted key soldiers in each category, those she would need to mentor, those who could lead, and those whose potential had been overlooked. It was a meticulous assessment, one that revealed not just weaknesses, but opportunities. Evelyn Carter did not merely see soldiers. She saw the entire machine of command and how to repair it. Around mid-afternoon, whispers escalated. The rumor of her survival had spread like wildfire through the base. Soldiers who had once trained under her, or merely heard stories, paused in their routines. Conversations halted when her name was mentioned. "Major Carter's back," one sergeant muttered to another. "You hear that? She survived Kandahar." The words hung in the air, a mixture of reverence and disbelief. Evelyn walked through the hallways, moving past officers and soldiers alike. She offered nods and brief acknowledgments, never lingering, yet her presence commanded attention. There was an unspoken energy in the room, respect tinged with tension. Everyone knew that this woman, once thought lost, had returned not for ceremonies or accolades, but for command. She had endured the impossible, and now the 117th Infantry Regiment would bear the weight of her expectations. In a quiet corner of the operations room, Sergeant Lewis approached her cautiously. "Ma'am," he began, voice low, "the junior officers. They're skeptical. Some don't believe a woman, especially one from covert ops, should be commanding the battalion." Evelyn turned her gaze on him, eyes steady, unwavering. "Respect is earned, Sergeant," she said simply, "not given, and it is never too late to earn it." Her words were soft, but carried the weight of experience, danger, and authority. Lewis nodded, understanding that the challenge ahead was not just for the soldiers, but for anyone under her command. By late afternoon, Evelyn convened a brief meeting with her senior staff. Colonel Braddock and Captain Reed were present, along with several company commanders. She began by laying out her vision: discipline, accountability, and operational excellence. She spoke clearly, concisely, never raising her voice unnecessarily, yet every word cut through the lingering skepticism in the room. She outlined her expectations and made it clear that under her command, mediocrity would not be tolerated. Some officers exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of a woman, fresh from covert operations and believed dead, taking over their regiment was daunting. Others, however, could not help but be impressed by her calm authority. Her strategy was meticulous. She was not here to alienate, but to assert. She understood the delicate balance between fear and respect, and she wielded it masterfully. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Evelyn walked alone through the parade grounds. She observed soldiers practicing maneuvers, drills executed with varying degrees of precision. Her eyes noted every gap, every lapse, every sign of unrest or uncertainty. These soldiers would be her responsibility. Their performance, their morale, and their loyalty would all rest on her shoulders. And she welcomed it. For Evelyn Carter, the past 3 years had been a crucible. Surviving an ambush, leading soldiers through enemy territory, evading detection, and returning home to a world that had written her off as dead, had honed her judgment, resilience, and authority. Now, she was ready to take that experience and reshape the 117th Infantry Regiment. Every decision, every observation, every order she gave from this day forward would be measured against the standard she had set for herself in the harshest conditions imaginable. The fog of the morning had lifted, replaced by the warm hues of early evening. Soldiers paused to watch her pass. Some whispered, others simply stared. Evelyn knew that her presence alone was already changing perceptions. The base would not be the same, and neither would the regiment. Her first day was only beginning, but already Major Evelyn Carter had announced, without words, that the rules had changed. She stopped briefly at the main building's steps, looking out over the parade grounds. The wind tugged at her jacket, carrying with it the distant echoes of morning drills and the faint sounds of laughter and chatter. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The ghost of Kandahar had returned not as a memory, not as a legend, but as a living, commanding presence ready to reclaim authority and transform a regiment that had been teetering on the edge of disarray. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, the message was clear. Evelyn Carter was back, and no one at Fort Bragg would ever question her existence or her authority again. Word of Major Evelyn Carter's return spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. By mid-morning, the base was buzzing with whispers, speculative glances, and the occasional stifled laughter of disbelief. Soldiers who had trained under her, or merely heard tales of her exploits, stared, some wide-eyed, others hesitant, at the figure walking confidently through the operations building. Evelyn had been thought lost to an ambush in Afghanistan 3 years prior, a ghost in the annals of military records. Yet here she was, alive, composed, and ready to assume command. Her footsteps echoed against the polished concrete as she navigated the hallways, nodding briefly to soldiers and officers. Some saluted instinctively. Others hesitated, unsure whether to follow the old protocol or acknowledge the rumors of her survival. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned each face, silently assessing, cataloging, calculating. Evelyn's presence alone carried weight, commanding respect before a single word was spoken. Captain Tyler Reed, her appointed second in command, watched her closely from the corner of the operations room. He had trained alongside her during previous missions in Afghanistan and had long admired her tactical acumen. Yet even he had not anticipated seeing her return in person. The stories did not capture the quiet authority in her movements, the measured patience in her gestures, or the piercing intensity of her gaze. Reed felt both a surge of relief and a pang of concern. The regiment had been left to flounder without guidance for too long, and now Evelyn's shadow loomed over every aspect of their daily operations. The colonel overseeing the 117th Infantry Regiment, Braddock, attempted to maintain composure as Evelyn approached his office. "Major Carter," he said, voice strained with controlled disbelief. We weren't expecting you back so soon." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I return when duty calls, Colonel." It has always called. There was no arrogance, no dramatic flourish, only the quiet certainty of someone who had survived impossible circumstances and emerged stronger. Braddock swallowed, realizing that protocol and rank could not mask his unease. He had once been certain of his authority here. Now that certainty wavered. Across the regiment, whispers began to circulate. "She survived Kandahar. She's the ghost everyone thought was gone. She's coming to take command." Soldiers who had doubted themselves, their leadership, or even their future in the unit now shifted in their chairs, a mixture of awe and anxiety coursing through the ranks. Evelyn's reputation preceded her, but her physical presence validated every tale and dispelled any lingering doubts about her survival. In the operations room, she gathered her senior officers, including Reed and several company commanders. The tension was palpable. Some officers were visibly skeptical. Others were silently impressed. Evelyn began by acknowledging the difficulties of the past 3 years, the gaps in leadership, the decline in training standards, and the need for a renewed sense of discipline and purpose. Her words were concise, delivered with deliberate clarity. She didn't yell or threaten. She didn't need to. Each sentence carried authority, and the officers felt it immediately. She turned her attention to Captain Reed. "You will assist me in assessing the regiment's readiness. Identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. Nothing is beyond scrutiny." Reed nodded, recognizing the immense responsibility now placed on his shoulders. Her expectations were high, and they would not be negotiable. He realized the task ahead was daunting. Not only would they need to restore operational efficiency, but they would also have to rebuild morale and trust within the ranks. As the meeting concluded, Evelyn took a brief moment to walk alone through the training yard. Soldiers paused in their drills, watching her move deliberately through the misty afternoon light. Her eyes caught gaps in formations, inconsistent execution of exercises, and the subtle signs of tension among squads. She cataloged every flaw and every potential, mentally plotting the steps needed to transform a fragmented battalion into a cohesive, formidable force. Evelyn's mind wandered briefly to the ambush that had defined the previous chapter of her life. The memory was vivid: night ambushes, overturned vehicles, the chaotic symphony of gunfire, and the relentless pursuit of survival. She had been forced to make impossible decisions, to lead a handful of soldiers through hostile territory with limited supplies and zero support. That crucible had forged her into a leader of unparalleled resolve. Now, she would bring that experience to bear on a regiment that needed more than training. They needed a leader who demanded excellence, accountability, and courage. By evening, the whispers had transformed into quiet conversations among the enlisted soldiers. Those who had once doubted her survival now questioned their own assumptions about leadership. Evelyn had become more than a returning major. She had become a symbol of resilience, a living embodiment of the idea that true authority arises from action and integrity rather than rank alone. The next morning, Evelyn convened another meeting, this time with the full company leadership. She outlined immediate priorities: equipment inspections, retraining protocols, accountability measures, and morale-building initiatives. Her approach was methodical, combining tactical knowledge with psychological insight. She understood that winning the confidence of her soldiers required more than orders. It required demonstrating competence, fairness, and unwavering dedication. Captain Reed watched her closely, noting how effortlessly she commanded attention. Some of the junior officers were visibly unsettled, struggling to reconcile their preconceived notions with the reality of her presence. Evelyn addressed their concerns head-on, emphasizing the importance of discipline, teamwork, and mutual respect. She did not belittle their doubts. Instead, she acknowledged them and provided a framework for moving forward. By the end of the session, even the most skeptical officers were compelled to recognize her authority. Evelyn's return also rekindled a quiet sense of hope among the rank-and-file soldiers. Many had felt abandoned or unsupported in her absence, and her presence restored a sense of stability. They were reminded that leadership could embody both strength and fairness, decisiveness and compassion. She did not seek adoration, but she commanded respect through competence and courage, a combination that was impossible to ignore. As dusk settled over Fort Bragg, Evelyn paused at the edge of the parade grounds, surveying the training exercises below. Soldiers marched in imperfect formations, some clearly fatigued, others distracted by lingering doubts. She knew that transformation would not be immediate. Rebuilding a regiment required patience, persistence, and the willingness to confront both overt and subtle resistance. Yet she also knew that the foundation of trust, once established, could reshape an entire battalion's culture. That evening, she returned to the operations office, reviewing personnel files and logistical reports. Every detail mattered, every discrepancy, every missed deadline, every overlooked safety measure was an opportunity for improvement. Evelyn was thorough, leaving nothing to chance. She was determined to understand the entire scope of the regiment's operations before taking decisive action. She recognized that knowledge was power, and preparedness was the key to effective command. As the night deepened, the base grew quiet. The hum of distant vehicles and the occasional bark of a sentry dog, the only reminders of life, continuing amidst the darkness. Evelyn Carter sat at her desk, meticulously reviewing reports, mapping strategies, and planning her next steps. She understood that leadership was not merely about giving orders. It was about foresight, accountability, and the courage to act decisively. Tomorrow, she would begin the first of many initiatives to restore discipline, cohesion, and pride within the 117th Infantry Regiment. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Surviving Kandahar had changed her irrevocably. Returning to a base that had believed her dead was another challenge entirely. Yet Evelyn faced it with the same resolve that had carried her through life-or-death situations before. Her presence alone was a statement. The ghost of the past had returned not to haunt, but to lead. As the clock ticked past midnight, she finally rose from her chair, stretched, and gazed out the window at the darkened training grounds. A subtle smile touched her lips. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Evelyn Carter had faced worse. The 117th Infantry Regiment did not yet know the strength that had returned to them, but they would soon understand. And when they did, no one would question her authority again. The morning sun spilled over the parade grounds at Fort Bragg, illuminating the worn faces of the 117th Infantry Regiment. Soldiers moved with mechanical precision, yet the subtle hesitations, missteps, and whispered complaints betrayed the fractures in the battalion. Major Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, eyes scanning every formation, every soldier. This was her first true test, not a briefing room filled with charts, but the raw, unfiltered reality of her unit. Captain Tyler Reed fell in step beside her, watching as she noted small errors others would have ignored. Soldiers marching slightly out of step, rifles handled carelessly, subtle murmurs of resistance in the ranks. Reed had been loyal, but even he knew the skepticism was widespread. Some officers openly doubted a woman, a covert ops veteran, assuming command of the regiment. Others whispered that she was far too strict, far too intense, and far too focused on perfection. Evelyn, however, ignored the whispers. She had learned long ago that leadership was not about popularity, it was about results. As she walked through the ranks, she observed individual soldiers, silently noting potential and weaknesses. She paused at a line of privates fumbling with their rifles, their hands shaking with nerves. "Adjust your stance," she said calmly but firmly. "Confidence is built through precision. In battle, hesitation kills." Her voice carried across the yard, not loud, not intimidating, yet everyone within earshot straightened instinctively. Whispers grew among the soldiers. Some muttered, "That's the woman who survived Kandahar," while others simply watched in awe. Even those who doubted her abilities could not ignore the way she commanded attention without raising her voice. Her authority was undeniable. Reed noticed the effect immediately. Soldiers who had shirked responsibility suddenly straightened in posture, their movements sharper, more deliberate. Evelyn continued her inspection, moving past squads and stopping occasionally to ask a question or correct a minor error. She found faulty rifles, missing ammunition, and incomplete maintenance logs. Officers had signed off on reports that didn't match reality, creating a false sense of readiness. She addressed each discrepancy with the calm precision of someone accustomed to life or death stakes. "Accountability," she said, her voice cutting through the early morning chill, "isn't optional. Every oversight risks lives. Every lie risks death." By mid-morning, the murmurs had turned into a tense silence. Soldiers paused, watching her methodical approach. Even the most skeptical officers began to understand. Evelyn Carter was not here to play politics, and she was not here to coddle anyone. She was here to enforce discipline, to instill confidence, and to transform a regiment that had been drifting toward chaos. During a brief pause, Reed approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, some of the senior officers. They're resistant. Some may even try to have you reassigned." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Resistance is expected," she said quietly. "Doubt is natural. But leadership is not measured by ease, it's measured by results. Let them doubt. Let them try to resist. We'll see who adapts and who doesn't." Reed nodded, understanding that she was not merely asserting authority. She was setting the tone for an entire battalion's transformation. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called an assembly. The soldiers, now aware of her presence, gathered in formation, standing shoulder to shoulder under the clear blue sky. Silence fell as she stepped forward, her posture relaxed but authoritative. She began to speak, addressing not only their technical skills, but their morale, cohesion, and sense of purpose. "This battalion has talent," she said, voice clear and steady. "But talent alone is not enough. Discipline, accountability, and teamwork are what separate success from failure. You have a choice: rise to the standard or fall behind. I will not tolerate mediocrity, and I expect each of you to hold yourselves accountable." The words hit harder than any drill or exercise. Soldiers who had shirked responsibilities or doubted leadership now felt a weight of expectation. Evelyn's presence reminded them that their actions were being watched, measured, and judged. She did not need to threaten. The authority came naturally from her presence, her history, and the quiet certainty in her voice. Some officers bristled at her approach. Lieutenant Harris, a long-tenured officer who had previously commanded respect through tenure rather than performance, whispered to a colleague, "Who does she think she is? Telling us how to run our companies?" But even he could not dismiss the sharp observations she had already made. The discrepancies in equipment, the errors in drills, the uneven performance across squads. Her analysis was precise, methodical, and impossible to refute. As the day progressed, Evelyn oversaw drills personally. She corrected mistakes, demonstrated techniques, and challenged soldiers to perform under pressure. When one soldier faltered during a complex maneuver, she didn't scold harshly. Instead, she instructed, guided, and demonstrated. Within minutes, the soldier executed flawlessly. The effect was immediate. Not only did confidence build, but morale improved as soldiers saw that skill, diligence, and attention could produce results. By evening, the transformation was visible. Small squads moved with tighter precision. Officers corrected minor errors instinctively, and whispers of skepticism had begun to give way to grudging respect. Evelyn's methods were demanding, yes, but they worked. The soldiers could feel it, the difference between being a unit that tolerated mistakes and one that expected excellence. Captain Reed observed from the sidelines, impressed. The soldiers' attitude had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but he recognized the significance. This was the start of cultural change, a foundation on which the battalion could rebuild its reputation. Evelyn's leadership was not about charm or authority alone. It was about competence, accountability, and setting the bar higher than anyone expected. As twilight settled over the base, Evelyn walked alone along the perimeter of the training yard. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dust, sweat, and the lingering fog of morning drills. She observed the soldiers quietly, noting who had embraced the challenges and who still resisted, the subtle differences in posture, focus, and determination. Tomorrow, she would push them harder. She would confront hidden weaknesses, enforce discipline, and begin to address the deeper issues that had eroded morale over the past months. Her mind flickered briefly to the ambush in Kandahar, the chaos and fear she had faced, the lives she had saved, and the impossible choices she had made. Those experiences had forged her into a leader capable of seeing beyond the surface, capable of understanding human behavior under stress, of predicting reactions, and of instilling confidence where it was lacking. Now, she would bring that expertise home, reshaping a battalion that had lost its way. As darkness fell, the lights of the base flickered on, illuminating the parade grounds and casting long shadows over the soldiers practicing drills. Evelyn paused at the edge of the field, hands clasped behind her back. The battalion had taken its first steps toward transformation, yet the road ahead remained long and arduous. Resistance would continue, skepticism would linger, and hidden challenges were yet to be uncovered. But Evelyn Carter was ready. The ghost of Kandahar had returned not to be celebrated, but to lead. Her presence alone had already begun reshaping perceptions, transforming doubt into cautious respect, and instilling a sense of accountability and purpose. The 117th Infantry Regiment would not remain the same, and every soldier within it would soon learn what it truly meant to serve under Major Evelyn Carter. The day ended quietly, but the impact of her return would ripple across the regiment for weeks, months, and years to come. Soldiers went to their quarters with a newfound sense of anticipation, officers with grudging admiration, and Captain Reed with a renewed understanding of the challenges and the possibilities that lay ahead. Evelyn's first day in command had only begun, but it had already left an indelible mark. The first full week under Major Evelyn Carter's command passed in a blur of relentless drills, inspections, and strategic planning. The 117th Infantry Regiment, long accustomed to lax standards and bureaucratic complacency, had never experienced leadership so uncompromising. Soldiers awoke before dawn, assembled in formation, and faced exercises that tested both their endurance and their discipline. Evelyn walked among them silently, observing, noting errors, and correcting with precision. Every misstep was recorded, every success acknowledged. Captain Tyler Reed followed closely, balancing the need to support her while managing the rising tension among the officers. Some openly grumbled about her strict methods, calling her too intense or unfair, but Reed recognized them as results. Cohesion was improving, morale subtly strengthening, and operational efficiency rising. Evelyn didn't respond to complaints. She let her actions speak, demonstrating the logic behind her methods. On the second day, she initiated a 48-hour field exercise designed to test stamina, leadership under pressure, and unit coordination. Soldiers marched through rain-soaked terrain, carrying heavy packs, navigating obstacle courses, and responding to simulated ambushes. Exhaustion etched itself on their faces, and some whispered about the impossibility of completing the exercise. Evelyn observed without comment, noting how soldiers reacted under fatigue and stress, who faltered, who persevered, and who inspired their peers. A young private struggled with navigation, his compass trembling in his hands. Evelyn approached quietly. "Confidence comes from preparation," she said firmly, guiding him through the technique and correcting his errors without condescension. Within minutes, he regained focus and executed flawlessly. Nearby, other soldiers watched, learning both technique and the subtle lesson. Competence demanded effort, patience, and attention. By nightfall, the regiment had faced every challenge she had thrown at them. Mud-caked and exhausted, the soldiers gathered around the field's perimeter, catching their breath and stealing glances at Evelyn. She spoke to them without raised voice, her tone calm but firm. "Excellence is not optional," she said. "Every mistake costs time, resources, and lives. You must be accountable to yourselves, to your comrades, and to the unit. Leadership is not about rank, it's about responsibility." Her words resonated differently than those of previous commanders. There was no arrogance, no need for theatrics, just a clear standard, a standard that each soldier could measure themselves against. Captain Reed noticed subtle changes. Hesitant soldiers were now taking initiative, and previously indifferent squads were aligning more cohesively. The seeds of respect and loyalty were taking root. Yet resistance remained. Some officers, particularly Lieutenant Harris, openly challenged her methods. "This is too harsh," he argued during a meeting with company commanders. "You're pushing them beyond reason. Morale will drop." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. Morale rises when confidence rises. Confidence comes from competence. Competence comes from discipline. These are not optional, Lieutenant. They are non-negotiable. Harris bristled, but fell silent, realizing her resolve was unshakable. Midweek, Evelyn uncovered evidence of deeper issues within the battalion. Supply logs were incomplete, training reports falsified, and certain personnel were avoiding accountability. She called a private meeting with Captain Reed, laying out her findings. "Someone is covering up mistakes," she said quietly. "And not just small errors, systemic negligence. We need to identify the sources before they undermine the unit further." Reed nodded, understanding the delicate balance between enforcement and investigation. The internal inquiry revealed subtle corruption, misplaced equipment, falsified training records, and minor embezzlement that had gone unnoticed for months. Evelyn did not react with anger. She reacted with calculated decisiveness. She addressed the officers involved privately, confronting the discrepancies while maintaining the dignity of the regiment. No one was immune to scrutiny. Her approach was methodical, ensuring accountability without destroying morale unnecessarily. Her discipline extended to personal interactions as well. During evening briefings, she listened to soldiers' concerns, offering guidance and solutions where appropriate. She balanced strict enforcement with mentorship, understanding that a regiment could only function if soldiers trusted their leader. This combination of firmness and fairness began to shift the battalion's culture. Soldiers whispered not only about her toughness, but also about her integrity and fairness qualities that inspired quiet admiration even among skeptics. A pivotal moment came during a tactical simulation. Evelyn noticed a squad hesitating under simulated enemy fire, their coordination faltering. She did not intervene immediately, but observed how others responded. Once the exercise concluded, she called a debriefing, praising effective actions while highlighting errors. Her feedback was precise, analytical, and actionable, leaving no room for ambiguity. Soldiers left the exercise understanding both their mistakes and the path to improvement. The same day, an anonymous note appeared on her desk. "Stop pushing so hard, or there will be consequences." Evelyn smiled faintly, recognizing the fear behind the words. This was resistance, thinly veiled as intimidation. She did not react impulsively. Instead, she reinforced the message of accountability. Fear would not dictate command. Competence, discipline, and integrity would. By the end of the week, tangible progress was evident. Drill precision had improved, equipment accountability was rising, and soldiers were executing maneuvers with greater cohesion. Even the most skeptical officers began to acknowledge her effectiveness, though some did so silently. Captain Reed, observing the changes, realized that Evelyn's combination of experience, intellect, and presence was reshaping the battalion far faster than any previous commander had managed. Evelyn's evening routine remained methodical. She reviewed reports, analyzed training logs, and plotted strategies for the coming weeks. Every discrepancy, every oversight, every piece of resistance was noted and addressed. She knew that leadership was a continuous process: vigilance, assessment, correction, and mentorship. The unit was already transforming, but true cohesion and respect would require persistence, courage, and unwavering consistency. On Friday evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees surrounding the base, Evelyn stood at the edge of the training yard, observing her soldiers. Some lingered in small clusters, catching their breath. Others reviewed drills quietly, focused and intent. She noted subtle changes: the straightened posture, the sharper focus, the willingness to follow orders without hesitation. Transformation was underway. The battalion was beginning to understand what it meant to serve under Evelyn Carter. Captain Reed approached, offering a quiet observation. "They're starting to listen," he said. Evelyn nodded, eyes scanning the formation. "They are," she replied. "But listening is not enough. They must internalize it. Discipline, competence, and accountability must become instinct. That is how a unit survives, not just in training, but in battle." Reed understood her meaning. This was not merely about drills. This was about forging a culture that could withstand any challenge. The night fell over Fort Bragg, lights glowing faintly along the parade grounds. Soldiers retired to their quarters, officers filed reports, and Evelyn remained at her desk, methodically reviewing every detail. She had set the standard, identified weaknesses, and begun the transformation. Yet she knew that challenges, both internal and external, still awaited. The battalion had begun to change, but maintaining progress would require constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and the courage to confront corruption, resistance, and doubt wherever it appeared. As she finally stood and gazed out the window, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The first week had been grueling, both for her and for the soldiers under her command, but results were evident. Discipline was returning, performance was improving, and the seeds of respect were beginning to take root. The 117th Infantry Regiment had seen the ghost of Kandahar return, and in doing so, had glimpsed the potential of a leader who could transform them from a fractured unit into a disciplined, formidable force. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps even new resistance. But Evelyn Carter was ready. She had survived impossible odds before, and she would not shy from the trials ahead. The battalion would soon understand that leadership under her was not negotiable, but it was worth every ounce of effort, every moment of sacrifice, and every step toward excellence. The foundation had been laid, and from here, the 117th Infantry Regiment would rise or falter under scrutiny. Evelyn had no doubt which outcome she would allow. The air in Fort Bragg was thick with tension, even as the morning sun spilled over the parade grounds. The 117th Infantry Regiment had made progress under Major Evelyn Carter's uncompromising leadership, but beneath the surface, shadows of resistance remained. Rumors of dissent had begun to surface, whispers of discontent among officers who resented her authority and enlisted soldiers uncomfortable with the sudden demands for accountability. Evelyn knew that true transformation required confronting these shadows head-on. Captain Tyler Reed walked beside her as she conducted her morning inspection. The soldiers moved with tighter precision than the previous week, yet subtle signs betrayed underlying unrest. Some soldiers exchanged furtive glances. Officers muttered under their breath. Evelyn observed everything. Leadership, she understood, was not merely about visible actions. It was about reading the subtleties, interpreting behavior, and addressing problems before they festered. Her first meeting of the day involved a full review of the battalion supply and maintenance logs. Discrepancies she had noted earlier were more systemic than she had anticipated. Missing equipment, falsified reports, and incomplete inventories pointed to negligence and possibly intentional sabotage. She narrowed her eyes, understanding that some officers were protecting their own mistakes while undermining the efficiency and trust of the regiment. Reed leaned toward her quietly. "Ma'am, if this goes public, it could cause a mutiny or worse. Some officers might resist openly." Evelyn considered him, her gaze calm and calculating. "Let them resist. Those who do not adapt will be exposed. This is about accountability, not popularity. Discipline will either unify this unit or it will fracture it further, and I will ensure the former." Evelyn called a discreet meeting with the senior officers suspected of complicity in the mishandling of supplies. The tension in the room was palpable. Whispers ceased, and every pair of eyes fixed on her. She did not raise her voice or scold. Instead, she outlined the discrepancies she had found, presenting evidence in a methodical, unemotional manner. "Mistakes have consequences," she said quietly, each word measured. "I am not here to punish unfairly. I am here to ensure this unit operates efficiently and honorably. You must account for every action, every decision, and every omission." Some officers squirmed. Others met her gaze defiantly. Lieutenant Harris, the vocal skeptic from the previous week, attempted to interrupt. "Major Carter, we've been managing this regiment for years." Evelyn's eyes locked on his. "Years of mismanagement will not excuse negligence," she said coldly. Silence fell over the room. Harris realized that authority in this space was no longer measured by tenure or rank. It was measured by competence, integrity, and presence. Over the next several days, Evelyn orchestrated a series of investigations and audits. She worked tirelessly, cross-referencing supply records, verifying training logs, and questioning both officers and enlisted soldiers. Her approach was surgical. She sought not only the guilty, but also the factors that had allowed negligence to thrive. Her objective was clear: root out corruption, restore accountability, and rebuild trust within the ranks. During one intense audit session, a sergeant tried to downplay missing equipment, suggesting it had been misplaced during exercises. Evelyn's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Misplaced," she said slowly, her tone leaving no room for ambiguity. "That is not acceptable. Every piece of equipment represents the lives of soldiers. Misplaced is a choice, whether conscious or not. You will account for it immediately." The sergeant hesitated, then complied, realizing resistance would only prolong scrutiny. By midweek, Evelyn had identified a small network of officers and enlisted personnel who had exploited gaps in oversight for personal gain or to cover incompetence. She did not act impulsively. Instead, she convened a strategic meeting with Captain Reed, discussing the best way to address these issues without fracturing the entire battalion. "We must expose negligence without destroying morale," she said. "The message must be clear. Accountability is non-negotiable, and trust is earned, not assumed." Her plan was precise. Public acknowledgement of misconduct would be limited to the parties involved, while broader lessons would be communicated through drills, briefings, and mentorship programs. Evelyn understood human psychology. Shame, when wielded carefully, could correct behavior. Fear alone would breed resentment and rebellion. She intended to rebuild loyalty, not merely enforce discipline. That evening, she convened the first disciplinary and mentorship session. Officers responsible for errors were questioned directly, required to provide explanations, and assigned corrective actions. Evelyn's demeanor remained calm, authoritative, and fair. She emphasized the importance of learning from mistakes and taking personal responsibility. Soldiers watching the proceedings realized that accountability applied to everyone, regardless of rank, and that competence and integrity were the true markers of leadership. Meanwhile, rumors of her decisive actions had spread throughout the regiment. Whispers of "she's not afraid to confront corruption" circulated in barracks and mess halls. Some soldiers felt relieved. They had long suspected internal mismanagement, and now a leader of unquestionable capability was addressing it. Others were intimidated, fearful of scrutiny and exposure. Evelyn's reputation as a fair but unyielding commander grew with every calculated decision she made. A critical moment arrived when a junior officer attempted to intimidate a soldier into falsifying a report to avoid blame. Evelyn caught the act immediately. She called the officer aside, presenting evidence and questioning motives. The officer tried to argue, but Evelyn's quiet authority left no room for negotiation. "Integrity is not optional," she said. "You either uphold it or you are removed. There are no exceptions." The officer, realizing the futility of resistance, complied and began rectifying the mistake. By the end of the week, significant progress had been made. Equipment inventories were accurate, training logs reflected reality, and officers and soldiers alike were beginning to internalize the expectations set by Evelyn Carter. The battalion had started transforming from a unit plagued by negligence and skepticism into a regiment capable of accountability, discipline, and cohesion. Captain Reed observed the changes with cautious optimism. He recognized that Evelyn's approach, meticulous, fair, and unflinching, was reshaping the culture of the regiment. Even the most resistant officers had begun to comply, realizing that resistance was futile against a leader who combined experience, strategic thinking, and presence. Yet Evelyn knew the battle was far from over. Resistance, she understood, often lingered beneath the surface, manifesting in subtle forms of sabotage, miscommunication, and hesitation. Leadership, she reminded herself, required constant vigilance. The transformation of a battalion was not a single victory. It was a continuous effort to maintain standards, enforce accountability, and inspire trust. That night, she walked the perimeter of the base alone, observing soldiers quietly maintaining equipment, reviewing drills, and preparing for the next day. She noted subtle improvements in posture, focus, and teamwork. The shadow of doubt that had lingered since her arrival was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a cautious respect. The battalion, she realized, was learning to operate under a leader who demanded excellence and delivered fairness. As she returned to her office, Evelyn allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. 3 years ago, she had survived impossible odds in Kandahar, leading soldiers through hostile territory with limited resources and zero support. Now, she faced a different kind of battlefield, one of human behavior, trust, and institutional inertia. Yet she was undeterred. Leadership, whether in combat or on base, required courage, intelligence, and persistence, and Evelyn Carter had proven time and again that she possessed all three. Tomorrow, she would continue the work of consolidation, reinforcing discipline, mentoring officers, and strengthening the bonds between soldiers. The shadows within the ranks had been revealed. They would not disappear overnight. But Evelyn knew that with consistent enforcement of standards, unwavering accountability, and tactical mentorship, the 117th Infantry Regiment could be transformed into a unit that not only obeyed orders, but understood the principles behind them. For now, however, the first signs of change were undeniable. Soldiers moved with greater precision, officers executed directives with increasing efficiency, and the whisper of resistance had quieted. Evelyn Carter had illuminated the shadows within the ranks, confronting corruption, exposing negligence, and laying the foundation for a regiment capable of excellence. The journey was far from complete, but the course had been set, and every soldier would soon learn that under her command. Mediocrity was not tolerated, competence was rewarded, and integrity was non-negotiable. By the second week of Major Evelyn Carter's command, the 117th Infantry Regiment had begun to feel the tangible weight of transformation. The initial shock of her return had subsided, replaced by a mixture of apprehension, respect, and cautious curiosity. Soldiers moved with greater precision, officers executed orders more consistently, and subtle murmurs of skepticism had started to fade. Yet beneath the surface, the battalion still harbored pockets of resistance, individuals unwilling to accept the authority of a woman who had survived the impossible and returned to reclaim command. Evelyn was well aware of these lingering shadows. Resistance, she understood, could manifest in subtle ways: misreported drill results, incomplete equipment checks, and passive-aggressive behavior among officers. It would not be eliminated by authority alone. It required confrontation, demonstration of competence, and strategic reinforcement of loyalty. Leadership, she believed, was forged through both action and presence. The morning began with an intensive tactical drill designed to test the regiment's coordination under simulated combat conditions. Soldiers navigated rugged terrain, executed maneuvers under strict time constraints, and responded to simulated ambushes. Evelyn observed from a vantage point, noting every hesitation, every error, and every successful execution. Her notes were meticulous. She cataloged who adapted quickly, who struggled under pressure, and who attempted to circumvent responsibility. A small squad, led by a previously skeptical officer, hesitated under simulated enemy fire, their coordination faltering. Evelyn approached, moving with silent authority. Without raising her voice, she issued precise corrections and guided the squad through the proper maneuver. Within minutes, the soldiers executed flawlessly. The effect was immediate. Confidence surged, morale strengthened, and observers, previously doubtful, began to recognize the effectiveness of her leadership. Captain Tyler Reed, positioned nearby, took note of the subtle shift in energy. She doesn't just command, they follow because they want to, not because they have to, he whispered to a fellow officer. Indeed, Evelyn's authority extended beyond orders. It manifested in trust, respect, and the quiet realization that she understood both strategy and human behavior on a level few could match. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called a series of one-on-one meetings with officers whose performance had been inconsistent. Some were defensive, bristling at the scrutiny. Others were openly remorseful, admitting past negligence. Evelyn listened attentively, asking pointed questions that revealed both competence and character. She did not berate. She assessed. She assigned corrective actions with clear objectives, emphasizing accountability and opportunity rather than punishment. By the end of the day, officers left her office with clarity and direction, understanding that her expectations were non-negotiable but fair. Not all resistance could be handled through observation and mentorship. That evening, Evelyn uncovered an attempt at direct sabotage. A junior officer had deliberately withheld training logs to undermine her assessment of the battalion's readiness. Evelyn reviewed the evidence with Captain Reed, her expression calm but resolute. "This is a test," she said quietly. "Not just of skill, but of character. Those who try to undermine the unit will not survive under my command. We act decisively, but strategically." The confrontation was deliberate. The officer was summoned to Evelyn's office. She presented the evidence methodically, leaving no room for ambiguity. "Integrity is non-negotiable," she said evenly. "You either uphold it or you face the consequences. The choice is yours." The officer attempted excuses, rationalizing the deception, but Evelyn remained unmoved. Ultimately, he complied, rectifying the error and submitting to mentorship. The message was clear. Sabotage would not be tolerated, but growth was possible for those willing to learn. The following morning, Evelyn organized a rigorous leadership exercise, pairing officers and soldiers in unfamiliar teams to navigate complex maneuvers under time pressure. The exercise was designed to reinforce cohesion, test adaptability, and strengthen trust among individuals previously resistant to her authority. Observers noted dramatic improvement. Squads executed strategies with increased precision, officers collaborated more effectively, and soldiers demonstrated initiative and confidence. Evelyn moved silently among them, noting successes and areas for improvement, her presence itself serving as both guide and motivator. By midweek, Evelyn introduced a mentorship initiative, pairing experienced soldiers with junior personnel to foster skill transfer, accountability, and loyalty. She personally monitored interactions, ensuring that guidance was constructive and that both mentors and mentees were fully engaged. The initiative began to reshape the culture of the regiment. Respect was earned through action, collaboration replaced indifference, and loyalty emerged as soldiers recognized that Evelyn's standards applied to all without favoritism. During an evening briefing, Captain Reed observed a remarkable transformation. Officers who had openly challenged her were now presenting strategies and solutions proactively, demonstrating an understanding of both her expectations and the operational objectives of the battalion. Soldiers moved with precision and confidence, executing maneuvers flawlessly. The regiment, once fractured and skeptical, was beginning to operate as a cohesive, disciplined unit. Yet Evelyn remained vigilant. She knew that loyalty, once earned, could easily be tested under stress. She continued inspections, training exercises, and tactical drills, ensuring that progress was not superficial. Every decision, every observation, and every corrective action reinforced the standard she had set. Competence, integrity, and accountability were paramount. The turning point came during a simulated night operation. The battalion was tasked with navigating a challenging terrain under limited visibility, responding to multiple simulated threats. Soldiers moved with precision, following orders without hesitation. Officers demonstrated decisiveness, coordinating effectively across squads. Evelyn observed from a vantage point, her eyes scanning the entire field. For the first time, the regiment executed a complex operation nearly flawlessly, reflecting not just training, but a fundamental shift in culture. After the exercise, Evelyn convened a debriefing. She praised successes, highlighted minor errors, and reinforced the lessons learned. Soldiers and officers alike left the session with renewed confidence, understanding that progress under her command was measurable, recognized, and valued. Captain Reed noted the subtle but undeniable change. Soldiers were no longer motivated solely by fear of reprimand. They were motivated by respect, trust, and a desire to meet the standard she had set. That night, Evelyn walked the perimeter of the base alone, observing soldiers maintaining equipment, reviewing drills, and reflecting on their day. She noted the subtle signs of loyalty forming. Officers who had once resisted now took initiative. Soldiers offered assistance without being asked, and the regiment moved as a coordinated unit rather than as disparate elements. The transformation was far from complete, but the trajectory was unmistakable. As she returned to her office, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The challenges of leadership extended beyond drills, inspections, and strategy. They encompassed human behavior, trust, and morale. She had confronted resistance, uncovered corruption, and tested loyalty. The battalion had responded, not perfectly, but decisively. For the first time since her return, Evelyn felt a measure of satisfaction. Tomorrow, she would continue consolidating authority, reinforcing standards, and preparing for new challenges. The regiment was no longer fractured. It was evolving into a unit capable of excellence, resilience, and loyalty under her command. The 117th Infantry Regiment had survived doubt, resistance, and mismanagement, and under Major Evelyn Carter, it was beginning to thrive. The night grew quiet, the lights of Fort Bragg illuminating the training grounds. Soldiers retired to their quarters with a renewed sense of purpose. Officers filed reports with greater accuracy. And Captain Reed, observing the results of the week, understood the scope of Evelyn Carter's impact. She had not only reclaimed authority, but had begun forging loyalty, respect, and cohesion within a battalion that had once been on the brink of disarray. Evelyn sat at her desk, reviewing reports and mapping strategies for the coming week. She understood that the path to excellence was continuous, demanding vigilance, persistence, and unwavering commitment. The battalion had taken its first steps toward transformation, but the journey was ongoing. Every soldier, every officer, and every decision would contribute to the enduring legacy of the 117th Infantry Regiment under her command. As midnight approached, Evelyn Carter rose, gazed out over the parade grounds, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Loyalty had been tested, resistance confronted, and authority reaffirmed. The battalion was responding, adapting, and evolving. The journey ahead would demand courage, skill, and unwavering integrity, but Evelyn was ready. The ghost of Kandahar had returned, not to haunt, but to lead and under. Dawn broke over Fort Bragg with a pale golden light, illuminating a regiment that had undergone a metamorphosis few could have imagined. The 117th Infantry Regiment, once fractured by skepticism, resistance, and negligence, now moved with a cohesion and confidence that spoke volumes of Major Evelyn Carter's leadership. Soldiers marched in perfect synchrony, officers coordinated seamlessly, and every drill, maneuver, and formation reflected the unyielding discipline she had instilled. Evelyn stood at the edge of the parade grounds, scanning the ranks. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, observed every subtle detail: posture, focus, coordination, and attentiveness. Captain Tyler Reed stood beside her, a rare smile breaking his usually serious demeanor. "They're different," he said quietly. "More than I thought possible in this short time." Evelyn allowed herself a faint nod. Transformation, she knew, was not instantaneous, but the foundation of loyalty, trust, and accountability was now firmly in place. The morning began with a rigorous inspection of the regiment's equipment and readiness. Soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, demonstrating both precision and confidence. Officers briefed her on completed tasks, inventory status, and tactical readiness. Evelyn listened intently, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions or corrections, but largely observing. Her presence alone demanded accuracy, integrity, and attentiveness standards that had now become instinctive for the regiment. After the inspection, Evelyn convened a strategic planning session with the senior officers. This was a turning point. Officers who had resisted her authority now presented proposals, analyzed tactical scenarios, and collaborated proactively. Evelyn evaluated each recommendation with a critical but fair eye, reinforcing correct strategy and redirecting errors with guidance rather than reprimand. The room's energy had shifted from hesitation to engagement. Resistance had been replaced by respect. Captain Reed noted the subtle but profound change. "They're not just following orders. They're thinking like leaders," he whispered. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room, noting how officers who had once openly challenged her now sought her input, integrating her guidance into their strategies. The seeds of loyalty, carefully nurtured through discipline, fairness, and mentorship, had blossomed. Midday brought a critical test, a full-scale tactical exercise simulating multi-pronged attacks under limited visibility. Soldiers navigated complex terrain, coordinated squad movements, and responded to simulated ambushes with rapid, calculated precision. Evelyn observed from an elevated position, taking meticulous notes. Every hesitation, every initiative, every success was recorded and analyzed. She noticed officers stepping up decisively, soldiers communicating effectively, and squads executing maneuvers with near-perfect coordination. A moment of crisis occurred during the exercise, when an unexpected simulated explosion blocked the regiment's planned route. Several soldiers froze, unsure of how to adapt. Evelyn moved quickly, issuing calm, precise orders, guiding units through alternative strategies. Her composure under pressure inspired confidence. Hesitation gave way to decisive action. The regiment completed the exercise successfully, earning praise not from Evelyn but from themselves, recognizing their capability and cohesion. Following the exercise, Evelyn convened a debriefing. She highlighted successes, addressed minor mistakes, and reinforced lessons learned. Her feedback was measured, analytical, and actionable, emphasizing both accountability and initiative. Soldiers left the session with a sense of accomplishment, understanding that their transformation was not the result of luck or coercion, but of discipline, competence, and the trust they had cultivated under her command. That evening, Evelyn walked among the soldiers, observing personal interactions, mentoring sessions, and the careful maintenance of equipment. She noted subtle changes in demeanor. Junior officers approached her with questions, demonstrating initiative. Enlisted soldiers assisted each other without prompt. The whispers of doubt had vanished, replaced by quiet pride and mutual respect. The regiment was no longer merely functional, it was thriving. Captain Reed approached her quietly. "Ma'am, they're asking about future deployments. They want to know what's next," he said. Evelyn's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The question was not about assignment, it was about trust. The regiment had come to believe in her leadership and sought direction, eager to demonstrate their capability under her guidance. "They will face challenges," she said calmly, "but they are ready. We will continue to build strength, skill, and cohesion. When the time comes, they will execute with precision and honor." That night, Evelyn convened a final leadership council with the senior officers. She praised their growth, acknowledged their contributions, and reminded them of the responsibilities they now carried. Officers who had once resisted her now expressed gratitude for her mentorship, recognizing the clarity, fairness, and strategic brilliance she had brought to the regiment. Loyalty had been forged in fire, and respect had been earned through competence and unwavering standards. In her private office, Evelyn reviewed reports, equipment inventories, and operational plans. Her gaze drifted momentarily to a photograph on her desk. Her team in Afghanistan, moments before the ambush that had changed her life. Memories of survival, sacrifice, and leadership under pressure flooded her mind. Yet this battlefield, though different, required the same qualities: courage, strategy, vigilance, and the ability to inspire and lead under immense pressure. She was prepared, The following morning brought a ceremony, a recognition of the regiment's progress and the establishment of Evelyn's command. Soldiers, officers, and invited dignitaries gathered on the parade grounds. Evelyn stepped forward, her uniform immaculate, her presence commanding yet composed. She addressed the regiment with measured authority, acknowledging their hard work, growth, and dedication. "You have transformed yourselves," she said. "Through discipline, accountability, and integrity, you have become a regiment capable of excellence. This is not my achievement alone. It is yours. You have earned the trust, the cohesion, and the readiness that define a true unit." As her speech concluded, soldiers stood taller, officers exchanged respectful glances, and Captain Reed noted the profound sense of pride that had settled over the regiment. Evelyn's leadership had not merely commanded obedience, it had cultivated confidence, loyalty, and a shared purpose. The 117th Infantry Regiment had been tested, shaped, and transformed under her guidance. Later that evening, Evelyn walked alone along the perimeter of the base, reflecting on the journey of the past weeks. The regiment had confronted doubt, resistance, and negligence, and had emerged disciplined, cohesive, and capable. Officers and soldiers alike had come to respect her authority, understand her expectations, and embrace the standards she set. Loyalty had been forged through consistency, fairness, and unwavering competence. As she gazed at the stars above Fort Bragg, Evelyn Carter allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The battalion had survived the crucible of her leadership, and in doing so, had become stronger, more capable, and more unified than ever before. Her return, once a surprise and a challenge, had become a catalyst for transformation, a testament to what leadership grounded in integrity, discipline, and courage could achieve. Captain Reed approached quietly. "They follow you now, not just out of duty, but because they want to," he said. Evelyn nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "Leadership is not about being liked," she replied softly. "It's about inspiring trust, demanding excellence, and guiding them to become better than they believe themselves capable of. That is how a regiment survives and thrives." The night air was calm, carrying the faint sounds of soldiers reviewing drills, maintaining equipment, and quietly reflecting on their own growth. Evelyn understood that vigilance was never-ending, and that leadership demanded constant attention. Yet for the first time since her return, she felt that the foundation she had laid was secure. The regiment had transformed, and under her command, it would remain disciplined, loyal, and formidable. As the final moments of the day passed, Evelyn returned to her office, reviewed the operational logs one last time, and allowed herself a subtle smile. The 117th Infantry Regiment had been tested, challenged, and reshaped under her authority. She had confronted resistance, uncovered negligence, enforced discipline, and cultivated loyalty. Now, the battalion was ready to face any mission, any challenge, and any obstacle that lay ahead. Evelyn Carter, the woman once thought lost to the chaos of Kandahar, had returned not to haunt the regiment with legend, but to lead it with precision, courage, and unyielding integrity. The 117th Infantry Regiment would never be the same, and neither would anyone who served under her command. Loyalty had been earned. Respect had been solidified. Excellence had been demanded and achieved. In the quiet of Fort Bragg that night, under the watchful stars, Evelyn Carter knew one truth above all. True leadership is forged through trials, proven through action, and remembered through the lives it shapes. The regiment had survived her return, and it had thrived, and she would continue to lead unwavering as both guardian and guide, shaping the soldiers under her command into a force worthy of their legacy and capable of meeting any challenge head-on.